Welcome to the Gracious Guest Show. It's time again for another episode of the show, and I'm your humble host, Mike Creevy. And if you're just tuning in for the first time, the Gracious Guest Show, it's a little play on a passage from Paul's letter to the Ephesians in the New Testament, and at the core of it is just this kind of understanding. The understanding that the universe itself is a gift, it's a creation, that we are all part of that. And, that essentially here we're guests in what God has created, really. And we want to try to be gracious then, So how do you do that? How do you, be appreciative and gracious of the world around you, of all the blessings that life has to offer? And, look, there's a lot of terrible things we run into. There's a lot of suffering that happens in life and a lot of negativity out there today. And, there's no shortage of places to go to kind of get that perspective. It's sometimes difficult to kind of hear the other side, the stuff that's going right, or to put it more plainly, I guess, how to stop and smell the roses. How to take time out of our busy, crazy, sometimes stressful days to just try to appreciate stuff that might not be so obvious. So that's kind of what we do on the Gracious Guest Show. I go through a lot of different kinds of topics, whether it's Star Wars or movie reviews or book reviews, which is something I'm going to do today a little bit, speculating on all sorts of different kinds of stuff, or just sharing from my own life. And yeah, so anyway, that's just kind of a lot of different stuff that happens on the Gracious Guest program. Make sure to check out the website, by the way, over at thegraciousguest.org. And I have my blog there. I have podcast links, for previous episodes of the program, and also ways to get in touch with me if you want to share any thoughts about the ministry, really, or about the podcast in particular, and offer ideas for new shows, new topics, and that kind of thing. Let me know. Just sort of drop me a line through the website. Today I want to actually talk a little bit about this book that I finally got around to reading by German philosopher Josef Pieper, Pieper, great name, Josef Pieper. Just kind of a funny, I don't want to say a funny name. I mean, it was his name, but he was a German philosopher, and the name, if it sounds a little strange to you, it's a German last name, so that's where that comes from. But Josef Pieper was a philosopher, a 20th century philosopher who I've read a couple of his works, and some of them I had to read for school, and just I'm no expert on him, but this book was recommended, and it's the one I'm holding here is actually it's one volume with two sort of essays in it. So the whole book itself, it's only, it's like 3/4 of an inch sort of thick. It's not really that big. It's 143 pages, but it's two books in one, kind of two little books in one. And he wrote them both in the same summer, one right after the other, so they included them in this volume. But the more famous of the two is called Leisure, the Basis of Culture. He wrote this in 1947, and then the second part of it is The Philosophical Act. So basically what this is the first part really takes up the question of leisure and what is leisure, the sort of things we do as we tend to think of it as our what we do in our spare time, the stuff I do for fun. What's interesting is he approached it in a way I've never even heard of, and it blew my mind. So I just wanted to, first of all, recommend it. And what's neat is what I didn't expect was how much he talks about wonder in here, which is, of course, probably one of the most fundamental aspects or things that we focus on the Gracious Guest Show, is this idea of wonder, marvel, noticing the incredible in the mundane sometimes. And so he had a lot of really cool things to say about that I'm totally going to steal, I think, and implement into future shows. But first of all, I just want to recommend this particular volume from Ignatius Press. So if you look it up I got it on Amazon, or you can go to Ignatius Press's website. And again, so it's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, and then it also includes The Philosophical Act by Josef Pieper. So anyways, what he talks about here, he starts off really interestingly enough pointing out that I guess etymologically, the sort of root words that we end up eventually translating into our concept of leisure actually goes back to schola, or like the idea of a school. And he talks about how leisure to the ancients was not like what you do when you're not working, or like, well, if I have some spare time after my real life of like work and productivity and producing this, that, and the other thing, where I view my entire human existence as just sort of all about consumption and production and all that. He basically says far from it. He essentially says that for the ancients, leisure was like real life. The life of relationships and wonder and deep sort of reflection on the meaning of life and the value of poetry and that sort of thing. And then he kind of goes in more in the second half of the book, in the philosophical act, to talking about what is philosophy. What actually is it? What is the philosophical endeavor all about? And so anyways, and there's far too much to summarize, but I just want to hit a couple highlights here and just give you my brief little synopsis of it. And then this will be a relatively short episode. I really encourage you to go get this and take your time with it, because it's pretty deep for something so short. And that's kind of how Pieper writes. But where is it here? Let me, this is neat. So here's one little, let me just read a couple little lines here. He says, leisure, this is on page 46 of the book. He says, leisure, it must be clearly understood, is a mental and spiritual attitude. It is not simply the result of external factors. It is not the inevitable result of spare time, a holiday, a weekend, or vacation. I think that's what most of us think it is. He goes on, it is, in the first place, an attitude of mind, a condition of the soul, and as such, utterly contrary to the ideal of quote-unquote worker in each and every one of the three aspects under which it was analyzed. Work as activity, as toil, and as social function. So anyways, this is the point in the book where he's, especially in his sort of just post-World War II kind of time frame too, he's in Germany and he's, looking at a lot of different things, the more modern notion of like the capitalist mentality versus the collectivist or communist, Marxist kind of ideologies. He brings some of those things up, the different competing concepts in Europe of his time of the worker, as basically like reducing human value to just being about, how much you can produce. He's basically saying that is completely inimical to the ancient world, to the classic vision of man and what human being is and is for. So that's what's really cool, is Pieper is kind of developing, as I read it here, more and more throughout this book, this idea of what is a human being. It seems like such an obvious question, or something that we might not take seriously. Like, well, everyone knows what a human is. Yeah, but do we though? Right now, I don't know. I tend to live sometimes as if that's real, that a human being is just about, work, right? And just getting stuff done. He says here, this is neat. Then he moves on later. He says, the soul of leisure, it can be said, lies in celebration. Celebration is the point at which the three elements of leisure come to a focus. And he lists them. He says relaxation, effortlessness, and superiority of active leisure to all functions. In other words, this is not something that just happens to you, but something it's again like an attitude. It's a real thing, a real experience, a positive experience, not just the absence of the busyness. It's like silence. There's a great book out right now. I'm kind of working my way through, Cardinal Robert Sarah from Ghana in Africa, and he's got a just an incredible. You know what? I'm drawing a blank. I think he's from Ghana. I might have that wrong, but he's from Western Africa. But Cardinal Sarah points out in this book that silence, and in the Christian tradition, of course, the importance of silence, all throughout the Bible, but that silence is not synonymous with quiet. Quiet, be quiet, be quiet. And even in Italian, like if you go to the Sistine Chapel and you go in there and it gets a little noisy, you'll have the guys on the microphones, silenzio. It's kind of creepy, like this voice comes over the microphone or the speakers, silenzio. And you're like, what? So there's these dudes in the Sistine Chapel who are there to help preserve like reverence, right, in that space. And there's all these tourists there. But even that, it's not, silence is not really just quiet. Cardinal Sarah insists that in the biblical tradition, that silence is, again, it's a positive thing. It's a positive reality. It's an experience that's not just an absence of noise. because you can have a totally, like absolutely quiet room, but never really enter into silence, into prayer, into a deep and profound, like, anchoring in God. You have to actually will that to happen. You need to align your will with God's will and ask him to bring you into that reality. So this is neat. So he's talking about that same kind of thing, and he says, if celebration is the core of leisure, then leisure can only be made possible and justifiable on the same basis as the celebration of a festival. That basis is divine worship. This is really, really cool. And so basically he then is going to flesh this article out, or this sort of assertion out, and he's going to basically go into showing how, from his reading of this, he makes a really interesting and compelling, I think, argument that leisure is completely rooted in some vision of divine worship. Or then, anyways, he basically says this. He goes, "There's no such thing as a festival, quote, without gods." He's making a pretty bold claim here that human beings' natural experience of leisure is always rooted in some kind of worship. And this is a little scary for us when you think about it, because what are some of the things that we tend to find our leisure in? Well, right now, I mean, like, you look at honestly, kind of an obsession with sports, for example. And I love sports, I love athletics, but like, you look sometimes at, you look at how much time and attention a lot of people devote to sports. You can make a really good argument for that becoming basically somebody's idol. Idol in the strictest sense of the term. This is something that you have invested so much of yourself in, and you rely so much on it, that it can move in short order from a healthy sort of or healthy hobby or something like that, or interest, to something that is like a guiding principle of my whole life. Sports, we can't let that become that. That's not healthy. And that goes for anything else, not just sports. Whatever we love, art, music, movies, social time with friends, going out with friends, reading, whatever it is. And again, these aren't bad things. These are good things. But when you turn those into your sort of ground, that you stand on, it starts to get into some dangerous territory, because every one of those things, as good as they are, is limited. Every one of those things has a beginning and an end. And when you sort of pin too much of your whole human experience in something that has a beginning and an end, you're never, ever going to be able to find true happiness and fulfillment. What Pieper's pointing out here, which is interesting, and then he gets more to this in the second part of his book about philosophy, he starts to talk about wonder. Let me see if I can find that one little part here. Oh, well, one last piece on this. This is a real key here to leisure. He says, the origin of the arts in worship and of leisure, derived from its celebration, is given in the form of a magnificent mythical image. Man attains his true form and his upright attitude in festive companionship with the gods. This is pretty cool. His basic point, and he continues to flesh this out, is this idea that, you essentially, through human leisure, that is how we essentially rise above the animals in one sense. That's how we're drawn into the divine. We're drawn into the experience of wonder. And that we basically have to be open then and be receptive to experiencing wonder, which is something we don't so much make happen as we open ourselves, we submit ourselves, or open ourselves up to being able to be shown what is truly wonderful. And we sometimes seek that out. Like, we try so hard, like, I have to find really unusual, strange things, and we form in our own minds what the wonderful things are. And then we get disappointed when we can't find wonder, or we can't find enough strange or unusual things to kind of like make it what I want it to be, rather than experiencing wonder as it is in and of itself. And he says about that at one point too, and later in the Philosophical Act, he says, a man who needs the unusual to make him wonder shows that he has lost the capacity to find the true answer to the wonder of being. And then he goes on, he says, the very summit, and he's talking about writings of Goethe and others, and he says, He quotes in there, "The very summit of man's attainment is the capacity to marvel. Wonder does not make a man able. It means," he says, "wonder, however, does not make a man, quote, able. It means, after all, to be profoundly moved and shaken." And he pursues this. He says, "Wonder acts upon a man like a shock." Let me see if I can find this part here. Oh, back before that, he says, okay, this is on page 114. He says, "Because man's mind is ordained to knowledge of the first cause of the world, he is capable of wonder." Again, this idea that we're queuing into something that's not limited, something that is infinite, something that is eternal and mysterious. You know, that all human beings, there's like this echo in us of eternity, and we don't know what it means, you know, like, but we all have this, like, there's some that resonates in us somewhere. And then he says, "Wonder acts upon a man like a shock. He is moved and shaken, and in the dislocation that succeeds all that he has taken for granted as being natural or self-evident, loses its compact solidity and obviousness. He is literally dislocated and no longer knows where he is. If this were only to involve the man of action in all of us, so that a man only lost his sense of the certainty of everyday life, it would be relatively harmless. But the ground quakes beneath his feet in a far more dangerous sense, and it is his whole spiritual nature, his capacity to know, that is threatened." This is pretty cool. And then he kind of concludes this section talking about mystery and marvel and wonder and the things that kind of bring us to that experience. And he says, "Mystery means that a reality cannot be comprehended, because its light is ever flowing, unfathomable, and inexhaustible. And that is what the wanderer really experiences." Wow. Yeah, totally. There's my stupid, kind of goofy, almost, teenage level summary of that. Wow, totes, awesome. Okay, yeah, this idea, what is wonder? Wonder is not just like interest or fascination. If you want to go back, check out, I had a podcast a couple episodes ago, a ways back, about wonder and kind of some of the roots of where we get that word from. And, some of the things that I try to focus on this program, in not so much a hyper philosophical way, but, so this, reading Pieper's book, it's a philosophy book, it can be a little, heady at points. You just want to take your time and go through it. But what's he really saying at the end of the day? I think it totally is absolutely applicable to daily life for every one of us. Because what is life, right? Why am I here? Who am I? What am I here for? How do I find joy and happiness? Why do I feel the way I feel when I'm standing at the seashore? What is that I feel? What is that I experience? What is it when I, am alone at night in the desert in Arizona on army training sort of exercise? I'm far away from my home and my family, and I look up into the sky at night and I see those stars, brighter than I've ever seen them before, and I just feel overwhelmed by just the grandeur of all of it and the beauty of it, and just I'm not thinking of any one thing in particular. I'm just blown away, and I don't really think anything. I just stand there and just receive this just experience of marvel and just awe, and I'm dumbstruck, and everything falls away, right? So I think we all have those moments. We're all stressed out. We got family issues. We got sick friends or relatives, or there's just stress and whatever it is, or I got 50 projects at work I can't seem to get through. Every step I take forward, I take 2 steps back, I'm almost at the end of the day, and my boss emails me like 10 things he needs me to do, and I get upset, This is life, right? All these things happen. But if we root ourselves too much in those things, if those experiences, those things, those daily, as frustrated as they can be, those limited experiences, if my life becomes about those, or if I'm trying to pursue limited things to somehow fulfill my unlimited desire, I'm never going to be happy. I'm never going to be really satisfied. I'm just going to always be wanting more. So this is why on this program, I'm always encouraging you, try to just be open to wonder. And that's what's so cool, is it can come in the most unexpected ways. It can come from like a movie you never expected to generate that in you, or a book that you read, or just a nice fall walk. I'm recording this in late September. It's going to be October in 2 days, and just go out on a walk, right? Like go out, look at the changing leaves, and hear the crunching under your feet as you walk over them, and smelling that fall air and breathing it in deep. That can be such a tremendously rich experience. It can remind you of the fall when you were a little kid. There's no end to what can happen when we choose to have the attitude that is open to wonder, that is open to awe. And so that is what today in this episode is really about, right? The connection, leisure, philosophy, and wonder. They're all very, very closely bound, which I didn't quite realize, and this Joseph Pieper book helped me to see that. So check it out, Leisure, The Basis of Culture by Joseph Pieper, publication date 1947. The Ignatius Press version that I have here that I mentioned earlier, I'll put a link to it in the show notes. The publication date on that's 2009 from Ignatius Press. So definitely go and check it out, and check out some more stuff by Joseph Pieper. He's got some other great books, and that's pretty much it. So thank you for tuning in to the Gracious Guest Podcast. Check out the website, thegraciousguest.org. You can shoot me an email over at thegraciousguest@gmail.com, or drop me a line, like I said, through the website, to the contact form on the bottom of the site. Check out the blog posts. I got links in there to websites for a lot of friends and other great ministries and websites you can check out. And until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.